everyone. Welcome to the Cloud Security and Recovery Summit. Today's event was organized by the hardworking folks at Redmond Magazine and Virtualization and Cloud Review and AWS Insider, who have worked together to bring us some of the best independent experts on today's topic. Many thanks to our sponsor, Rubrik, the Zero Trust Data Management Company, for making this event possible. And thank you for joining us. I'm John K. Waters, Editor-in-Chief of Application Development Trends, and I'll be your moderator for the first of two information-packed sessions. But before we get started, I need to go over a couple of housekeeping details. Each of today's sessions is being recorded for later access. Keep an eye out for an email with a link to that recording. It'll be coming your way within the next few days. Each of today's sessions will be followed by a 5 to 10 minute Q&A. You can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. Please feel free to add your questions as they occur to you throughout the summit. We'll do our very best to get to all of them. Our sponsor, Rubrik, has provided some extra resources that can be found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a moment to check those out. And last but not least, at the end of the second session, one lucky attendee will be receiving an iPad Pro. But you must be present to win, so stick with us. Now let's get started with our first session, the Cloud Security Threat Landscape heading into 2022. For this session, we've called on Ian Thornton-Trump, Chief Information Security Officer at Cyjax. Ian is an ITIL certified information technology professional with 25 years experience in IT and cybersecurity. From 1989 to 1992, he served in the military intelligence branch of the Canadian Forces. In 2002, he joined the Canadian Forces Military Police Reserves and in 2013 retired as a public affairs officer. After a year with the RCMP as a criminal intelligence analyst, he worked as a cybersecurity analyst and consultant for multinational insurance, banking, and regional healthcare organizations. Needless to say, Ian has a great depth of experience with the threats facing small, medium, and large enterprises today. His experience and ongoing research have made him a sought-after cybersecurity consultant. Ian also teaches cybersecurity and IT business courses for CompTIA as part of its global faculty and is the lead architect for Cyber Titan, Canada's effort to encourage the next generation of cyber professionals. You guys are in for a great session. Take it away, Ian.
Thank you so much, John, and happy Friday to everyone. I know some of you have hours to go here in the UK where I'm based. It's 4 minutes after, but don't let me detract from the amount of fun that we're going to have with today. I put up a number of logos around some of the recent sort of things that I've been involved in. A lot of it has to do with support of both the intelligence community, my own work as a small, medium business, and of course the CISO of Cyjax, where I was bequeathed with being the chief security officer in the top 30 executives working in cybersecurity in the UK. So huge honor, and I just want to appreciate IDG Publishing for that. I have been very lucky this year to have been engaged in a continuous dialogue and opportunity to present on cloud security and cloud security threat landscape across all the different platforms. So what you're getting today is a mashup of almost a year's worth of engagement on these webinars about cloud. And, you know, I've come to some startling conclusions that is really around where our problems are in this space and some of the things that businesses can do to mitigate that. And essentially, we are in a continuous and rapidly accelerating digital transformation project. And of course, following in the footsteps of that digital transformation are the cyber criminals and ATP groups that are going to continue to try and exploit that newly created infrastructure or that existing infrastructure that an organization has. And of course, you know, we need to understand that when we talk about the supply chain, the cloud is a tremendously pertinent example of how our infrastructure and our capabilities are reliant on a third party. And I've got a lot of data to share with you folks today. I've uploaded a number of resources. And one of the things that I was talking with the great team here about prior to this was just how dynamic this situation is. I know folks that have taken cloud security architecture courses and security courses about 3 to 4 years ago, and they've recently gone through this recertification process to see what's new. And there's a tremendous amount that's new. And, it can be really jarring for folks because all of a sudden their favorite tool or the favorite thing that they relied on is now unavailable or potentially changed in terms of how it operates. Now, the ENSA is the European cybersecurity agency that sort of collects all sorts of data around cyber attacks and cyber threats. And I mean, they absolutely spell it out that there's two critical components to cloud-first strategies, right? That downtime is the enemy, of course, and restoration and backup and recovery are critical. And, this is why, I think Rubik is so great to talk about their offerings in this particular space, because fundamentally, this is what we're up against. Now, they asked me to really drill down in this into the threat model and where I see, the challenges in this particular space. And this is completely different in a lot of ways to our traditional moat and castle view of our on-premises network. And this is really about an entirely new understanding of exposure, of vulnerability management in the cloud. And I think maybe this is one of the biggest challenges that we have in the cybersecurity workforce at the senior executive level and the strategy level, is that cloud presents a whole bunch of different challenges and opportunity that the traditional data center build or the traditional on-premise structure of a network where you own, layer 1 through 7, and now you don't. So the dynamic changes completely on everything from tooling to training, right? So this is one of the things that we're going to go through. Now, we're not going to go super deep on all 8 of these because otherwise your eyes will be bleeding out your head from these slides. But we are going to talk about one of the big things that organizations fail at is actually visibility of what's going on in the cloud. And this isn't because, there's a lack of tooling to do this, right? I know folks that have basically pushed logs into Elasticsearch and written their own Splunk dashboards, but it's a talent that isn't currently sort of taught or found. A lot of it is research. A lot of it is working really hard to get the level of telemetry so you have confidence in application performance and security. And sadly, in a lot of cases, what you're finding is that you might really understand application performance because, downtime is critical to your organization, but the investment in an actual SIM or an actual log analysis function to detect security problems is lacking. And I've also seen vice versa, where DevOps is so focused on the mission of availability that integrity and confidentiality is sometimes missed. So visibility of the cloud infrastructure becomes important, but a discussion around the threat model is also really important when you're talking about visibility. Because one of the things you need to understand is if there's sensitive data, if there is confidential data within your cloud infrastructure that you're providing, the necessary security and compliance items need to be present. Now, one of the problems that comes as a result of that is when the business doesn't make a firm differentiation between logging and log management for compliance and security operations for detecting very bad things that are going on. So my number one point, I would say, on our exploration of this is gain the appropriate visibility based on a threat model so that you can differentiate between performance problems and security problems. And where we've gone a little bit further down the road is when we start applying machine learning and AI solutions into the security logs and mapping them to MITRE ATT&CK framework. Okay, so just to bring you up to speed on MITRE ATT&CK framework. MITRE ATT&CK framework is a way of expressing threat actor activities as these move forward and attempt to compromise your infrastructure. And I do need to give a shout out to a security researcher that works for Sajax, the company that I'm the CISO of, in that he recently contributed an updated MITRE ATT&CK framework based on a lot of what we're seeing in real-time attacks on cloud infrastructure. So I've included the link there, and congratulations to Bushido Token on his amazing contribution. Now, why does this become important? Well, if we can express MITRE ATT&CK activity and link it to SIM activity, we have a very good chance of interdicting an attack in the very early stages of that particular attack. But without a tuned SIM and without collecting the right telemetry, we have no hope of interdicting the attack until it has manifested itself within the organization. Now, where does machine learning and AI come into this? It's a good question. The idea being is that if you can train the AI and ML to see those early attack, MITRE ATT&CK reference points within the own stream of data that's coming out of your cloud, you have a very good chance of making accurate guess, because one of the biggest problems we have when it comes to logging and SIM is the signal-to-noise ratio. So eventually, where I see a huge evolution in the cybersecurity space is moving away from a risk-based model and moving into a MITRE ATT&CK framework scoring methodology to try and give us a true and accurate guess that something bad is going to occur. So this is going to be, I think, a quantum leap in the technology in terms of visibility, of specifically threat actor visibility in cloud infrastructure. And we're not really there yet. Now, complexity. I always love to throw down this quote from Bruce Schneier about the worst enemy of security is complexity. And the interesting thing that we're faced with, especially under the pandemic, was the rapid digital transformation of taking on-premise infrastructure, migrating it to the cloud so it was more universally accessible to all the folks working at home. Now, remember, folks, that the effort here was accessibility to the data so we could keep and maintain business operations. What wasn't mentioned in this was all of the technical debt that suddenly got moved from your on-premise infrastructure into the cloud without even addressing that particular requirement. Now, a lot of people ask me, Ian, why was it done? Well, it was done because a lot of the data centers don't have the capacity necessary to all of a sudden go and become a point of presence for an application that now needed to essentially be accessed by potentially what we would consider hundreds of branch offices. So, we might be constrained from bandwidth, performance, CPU, where in, the cloud, especially from the cloud provider's perspective, these things were infinitely scalable. Well, we saw during the pandemic here in the UK when infinitely scalable Azure actually was not infinite, and they run out of disk and compute. Shortly after the government announced that everyone can buy their groceries online. Yeah, that wasn't such a great idea when, the average transactions were 8,000 a week of buying groceries online. That went to 80,000. And of course, in infrastructure, the demands would just keep going. And we'll talk a little bit about that, because one of the things that has frequently happened that is it's almost a risk of itself, is that a poorly coded application that's moved into the cloud where the answer from the DevOps perspective is to just add more compute, more space, and more memory to it, quickly becomes a very expensive endeavor, right? And, there were so many different areas that all of a sudden needed to be moved from the on-premise world that we live in into the cloud, where external DNS routing, firewalling, internal DNS load balancing, front-end web server cluster, and back-end database clusters, maybe if you weren't using Elasticsearch or a blob or something like that. And then, of course, DRBCP at scale and performance monitoring. There was an awful big bill to do it right. And so if one of the ideas around the threat landscape and talking about 2022 and beyond, it's to really start addressing that lack of visibility and that overly complex environment with a whole bunch of vulnerabilities at all different layers. That is going to become a major focus of both operations, DevOps, and IT staffing. Which leads us to, what was the elegant solution that could be applied was architecture, right? Now, I, in previous cloud security and cloud in general presentations, I have a great debt to Sean Wrightsek of Immersive Labs for talking about what the challenges of architecture are, because people have met IT architects. But now it's sort of like, what kind of architect are you, right? Are you an enterprise architect, a software architect, or an infrastructure architect? All three are critical, are critically important to an organization that is looking to do cloud appropriately and properly. So one of the problems is we moved all of this potential technological debt into the cloud just because we could do, a physical to virtual P2V exercise. But it wasn't architected appropriately. And there was a lot of business capabilities and compliance needs and security needs that weren't addressed. So that is the grim reality, where architecture then becomes the key to reducing the entire threat landscape of your cloud infrastructure. Now, number 3, credentials, is really one that I want to harp on because, and echoing a presentation that I saw last night from, I think it's Sarah Young-Smith of Microsoft. The credential battle is going to be continuous and unending moving forward, okay? The campaigns that we've seen unleashed are not even, in a lot of cases, exploiting a flaw in the infrastructure itself. It is all about getting privileged access to the infrastructure for nefarious purposes. And one of the things that I uploaded to the resources table, because it blew my mind, is the InfoSec press and even the mainstream media have been completely obsessed with ransomware. Now, I'm not saying for a moment that ransomware isn't a really big threat, but according to the data that just came out of, and you'll love the title of this, the Cybersecurity Action Team at Google, Threat Horizons, Google Threat Intelligence, November 2021, Issue 1, guess what they're saying? Ransomware isn't really even on the radar of getting taken over by malicious actors in your cloud instance. It seems, at least if you're a Google cloud, in the Google cloud, 86% of the compromises led to cryptocurrency mining. With, wait, what? With, a 6% of hosted malware. So this, to me, was a little bit jarring, because all I've heard about for the last little while is they're going to get your credentials and they're going to land ransomware on your organization. And the data, at least from Google as a provider, that doesn't seem to be the case at all, which is even more interesting to me, because this becomes an essential problem of controlling the integrity to your cloud resources, and not so much now about a confidentiality issue with regards to data exfiltration and ransomware. And maybe this is because there's great products out there that are allowing us to restore our cloud infrastructure very quickly and efficiently. So I'm not exactly sure why the shift took place, but I've got some data on threat actors that I'm going to share with you as well that might give us some insight into that. So one of the things that I've also pointed out as being a major problem for cloud is budget. One could argue that budget is always a problem. But when you look at the fact that everything costs money in the cloud, bandwidth, storage, compute, security, applications, backups, and logging, all of that is going to consume money and resources. And it can consume it at an alarming rate, especially if there isn't some solid performance monitoring and that the solution is more of everything. Where I'm finding that budget becomes an extreme threat to the organization is when the training and the investment in the necessary tools from the architecture perspective, i.e. resources, end user training, support team, how are we going to support this application that's moved over to the team? What are the audit and compliance requirements? Are we going to be logging this? How are we going to store and manage those logs? The project management costs associated with application migration, et cetera, not budgeted for. And this becomes a huge organizational issue where a good 1/3 of your costs are going to be found in the second column along where we call the delivery of it and not so much the actual cloud itself. And so what I frequently see is organizations failing to account for this, and it has massive repercussions because the poor support team, who may be very comfortable in the Windows Active Directory environment and in the traditional client server application or even web apps within their own infrastructure, all of a sudden is plunged into a situation where they're in very unfamiliar waters with very little training whatsoever. Also, the budget becomes a huge issue because a lot of the times this may not be the only initiative that the company is going under, and also the issues around delivering these applications at scale across different geographies, and the issues around, if it is sensitive data, where that sensitive data needs to be potentially geo-fenced as well, right? So a lot of the tough questions when an IT department is asked to engage or a project team is put together that is asked to engage are not being asked. And if they're not being asked, the budget will go up when someone does ask that question about, are we okay to replicate German healthcare data into a UK data center? The answer would be no, not without a lot of work and effort. So where does this leave us? Well, it leaves us with, one of my favorite slides is the power of our own incompetence in this. And the nice thing about incompetence is it can be fixed, right, with knowledge and training. And so one of the biggest threats I see in the threat landscape is not enough training to deal with the bow shock, if you will, on the IT department from the rapid and sudden digital transformation that those departments are going through. Even just understanding within the IT environment that SaaS applications will always have an IT component to them, i.e. I can't get to the website where I'm supposed to do all of my work, becomes an IT problem. But it also becomes the fact that internally within that application, the IT teams have very little capabilities to understand and diagnose particular problems. Case in point, if you have an Expensify for managing expenses and someone can't get it to work, they are going to call the help desk, your help desk, because they've been trained to call the help desk if they are having a problem or if they need help. That's why it's called the help desk. But the problem is that if it's completely hosted and IT doesn't even know about it or own it, it's going to be a problem getting that user support. And the user won't care As far as the user's concerned, if it's plugged into the wall and it's something I need for work, it's the organization's, i.e. the IT department's, responsibility to make it work. So we have a couple of areas of incompetence in organizations, and maybe that might be a strong word, but ignorance, I think, is a fair one, is that the users will not really understand what's within the purview of the IT department or what has been outsourced via software as a service. So this is something where the actual user experience needs to be carefully monitored by the organization to ensure that people are getting their work done and it doesn't fall into this sort of grim silo of I can't get any help or support for the kind of things that I need. And then, unfortunately, the ramifications of that can be felt in the management. So I kind of feel like when we're dealing with cloud that a lot of us don't know what we're doing. And by no means am I a technical expert on, this area. These are just sort of my observations. But what I have seen is definitely a gap between the expectations of an IT support team when it comes to applications in the cloud, and that comes down to skill set. There's not enough cloud certifications and cloud training going on, whether or not that's a CompTIA Cloud Plus certification or some of the Azure certifications that are out there or all of the great Amazon certifications that are out there. The biggest investment you can make to deflate your exposure and to manage the threat landscape is going to be education. The other areas where I see a lot of failure and spectacular failure is when the business believes that they just can do it themselves, even though they have no experience doing digital transformation, right? Now, the other one is a big thing is the differences between developing on-premise software for on-premise consumption and in the cloud is remarkably huge. So one of the things that the cloud doesn't particularly enjoy is folks that don't have a rigid software development lifecycle process that has security added on. Because what happens inevitably is security gets disabled in order to make things work, and because everyone is incentivized to deliver the digital transformation solution, but no one is incentivized to make sure it's done safely. And if it can't be done safely, with compensating security controls that could be deployed. So this is a huge area that we see, and it's responsible for some of the security problems that are certainly very present in the future. So here's another area where it now ties back into that ignorance issue. It's that DevOps is sitting at a layer where they really are divided as a organization between the availability piece of being in IT and not so much the integrity and the confidentiality. And that's why you see the evolution of DevOps into DevSecOps to try and put a security responsibility and attach it to the production environment. The biggest sins that I've seen in this area are finding the production data in the development environment, either cloud-hosted or on-premise. That's a no-no. It's not a best practice. It should all be sanitized. All the sensitive data should be removed. Because remarkably, the dev environments are sometimes a lot loosier-goosier when it comes to cybersecurity. Folks are running domain admin because they need to install tools and fonts and libraries, right? The dev environment frequently is not aligned to the production environment, and therefore you get a lot of excuses of it works fine in dev, but it doesn't work on production. You go back, you look at the dev environment, it's one front-end server, one back-end server. You look at the production environment, it's 27 different instances. You start doing some troubleshooting, you have different patch levels of .NET in those environments, and that's why TLS isn't working properly. So we can all trace a lot of those steps back to a dev environment that doesn't reflect a production environment. Also, And I'll harp on this a little bit later, but now's a good time to mention that actual security testing, like pen testing, in my estimation, shouldn't be done in production environment. It should be done on a dev environment to secure the dev environment's build and then push that into production. Controversial topic. We can argue about that in the Q&A section. Default secure golden images and standard configs. Again, a lot of the times, DevOps is in a rush. They're busy. If you say, I need a Red Hat box, you'll get a Red Hat box. Then you'll ask them, I needed a patched Red Hat box because nothing is working. And they'll say, oh, yeah, sure. Guess we should do that. And then again, the big one that stuff like Rubrik, software like Rubrik really helps out on is the DRBCP at scale across different clouds, across different environments, and potentially hybrid. So that too is a challenge for DevOps, requires tooling, requires expenses. And then one thing I wanted to really point out was about this issue around vulnerability management for DevOps, because some of the time, like applying an OS layer security patch is generally a low-risk operation. However, .NET updates and even Apache updates, such as Struts and Tomcat, etc., can wreak havoc with applications that are deployed in production. So keep that in mind, and this is, again, goes back to the dev environment, is that the dev environment build needs to be a reflection of what's in prod, so that when you can apply a patch in the dev environment, you don't impact prod. You can see if everything is working so well. QA can smoke test it, and then you can apply that same patch in production. So again. So a lot of this stuff comes, and it's really now a change in the operational security for a lot of departments, going from an on-premises world where they were comfortable in living to the cloud, in that the software development lifecycle challenges within an organization have to now be more clearly defined. And this goes out, this is a huge shout out to John Oppendecker and Mike Thompson. Mike is at Zen, and John Oppendecker works for Wolters Kluwer on software development lifecycle training is essential to build secure coding practices, which then manifest themselves in the cloud. And this is critical with new languages like React.js and Node, in order to make sure that what you're doing is being done safely at scale, where it will be massively exposed to the full brunt of the internet. So the software development lifecycle challenges, because of cloud applications, is going to really impact your development approaches, your approaches to software development. And there's new threat models emerging that you need to be aware of that you're just not going to find in an on-premise environment. So a big change there. And again, this goes back to my harping on ignorance and incompetence, is really around understanding that the old practices that you used to do for that on-premise application that you've now migrated to the cloud can no longer occur. It needs to be brought up to a speed. Now, the cloud presents some really strange and different landscapes that we haven't seen before. Now, you can say that for an on-premise application, OWASP 10 is important. In cloud, it's critical if you don't have a compensating control in front of it, because it is going to highly likely come under heavy attack very quickly by threat actors. And interestingly enough, I was reading from that same Google report that I shared that credentials remain at least 50% of the problem, right? With weak or no password for user account or no authentication for APIs, accounts for 48% of our of exploited vulnerabilities in cloud instances. I think it's a really good point in that a lot of the times APIs are not properly secured. Some of them are even passing clear text. And as a result, you may easily pass a OWASP 10 scan using a commercial scanner, but the fact that you have exposed APIs with security weakness, no access control lists, passing clear text is a huge, huge problem. The other big one is the bugbear in the room is that security on storage buckets vulnerability that we see time and time again with exposed data. I'm going to introduce you guys to a firm right now that everyone should be paying attention to. Lack of access control lists, poorly configured security groups are all part of the problems associated with cloud. But then we see a lot of vulnerabilities in custom applications, the repository itself, the rendering applications such as like PHP, the CMS content management system. You might be using Drupal, Dreamweaver, God forbid, or WordPress even. And then, of course, you've got potential exposures in older versions of MySQL databases, right? The operating systems themselves, the hypervisor. You guys get it. You understand that there's a whole bunch of things that providers of cloud services may be responsible for, but all of those vulnerabilities are up for grabs when it comes to a threat actor. And one of the assumptions made is that the cloud instances will be kept up to date, right? Well, yes, but you may want to make sure within the terms and conditions what the SLA expectation is for that, because you need to make an informed decision. So I said exposed storage buckets are a huge problem. They are. Gray hat warfare is continuously identifying and reporting on exposed storage buckets and blobs, Azure blobs, due to that precise problem that we talked about, where cyber security controls are removed in order to make applications work, thus exposing, in some cases, very sensitive data. So this is worthwhile to take a look at, as are other vulnerability analysis, because nothing is more disconcerting than finding your intellectual property in a supply chain partner's S3 bucket. That has happened to me on numerous roles, where then there was some discussion and I would call it assistance provided to that organization to encourage them to secure that intellectual property. And again, when we talk about the ignorance of the vulnerabilities, folks, there's no excuse. All of the attack tools that are being using to hit your cloud instances are freely available to your own resources to use. So there's a lot of opportunity here to harden your defenses when you know what kind of attack tools are going to be used against your organization. And to be fair, those attack tools have been around a very long time, as has the threat against your cloud infrastructure, right? It should come as no great news that this type of attack has been around for a very long time, where thieves and cyber criminals get inside your organization's cloud infrastructure, and they will try and use it for nefarious purposes, of which we know, at least according to Google's data, that it's very likely going to be credential mining. Now, in itself, not a particularly huge major cybersecurity issue, but if it's insensitive data, you've got to assume compromise. And that means regulatory reporting, that means forensics, that means a big investigation. In a lot of cases, too, it's where the privileged account access to the dashboards or to the hypervisors is compromised, and then the cyber criminals will not only compromise your existing cloud infrastructure, they might spin up a horrendous amount of other servers to do cryptocurrency mining until you discover them. And that is a favorite attack conducted over the holiday seasons, i.e. right now, and of course, any long weekend lends itself to a cyber criminal attack where they can get an extra day of crypto mining on your dollar. Right, so let's talk a little bit about the actual threat landscape as it stands today. What we're seeing is 4 groups in particular, one basically, I would say at least two that are affiliated with nation-state actors or strongly linked to them, right? And two that are more on the cyber criminal side. But as you can see, it's really interesting what that attack surface looks like from the cyber criminals' tactics, training, and procedures. So in the first one, we see, they've been around for a while, but their purpose is to leverage remote code execution vulnerabilities in internet-facing software and servers. Okay, they don't discriminate between your on-premise infrastructure or in the cloud. And interestingly enough, those remote code execution vulnerabilities in some cases are a direct result of migrating an older application, doing a physical to virtual dump of it into a cloud instance, thus exposing it. There also is a huge report that came out from Palo Alto very recently as well that gave us some really great insight into how quickly things can come under attack. And it was phenomenal at how quickly their honeypots got attacked by the bad guys. So I think that I may have uploaded that document. I'm not. If you want me to send it your way, I'm at @fat_hobbit on Twitter. That's fat as in PHAT. Or you can just connect with the team here, and I'm happy to send it to you. The other one is, of course, Fancy Bear. I'm old school, so I'll call them by their original CrowdStrike names here. Widespread distributed brute forcing of credentials. Simple mitigation for that, multi-factor authentication, folks. This, again, Fancy Bear can be a sophisticated actor once they have gained access to your organization, but they tend to be a run-up and hit that organization and either brute force their way in or use password spray attacks is one of the tactics that they're quite known for. Now, Team TNT. Really interesting that this is a German-speaking cybercrime gang that really is all over Docker and Kubernetes and Amazon Web Services that have misconfigured and publicly exposed pieces to the internet. This is their jam, man. And these cyber criminals know those instances better than you probably do. Again, when you're looking at your particular threat model, if these are the kind of technologies you're using, these are the cyber criminals you need to be aware of, 100%. And then, of course, Chinese speaking cryptocurrency mining operations, something that apparently has victimized Google 86% of the time that a Google Cloud instance is compromised. But this is old school cryptocurrency mining. And that ebbs and flows a lot with the price of Bitcoin and the price of other coins in the market too. You'll see when it's climbing up to, 45, 50, 60,000 dollars, you'll see a huge surge in this kind of activity. Because even 0.01 of a Bitcoin is worth something, right? So again, when we boil this down and we look at the data, it's really pointing us in kind of like what we need to be aware of, right? Which is remote code execution vulnerabilities exposed on our infrastructure, brute force credential attacks and taking the mitigative action against those, misconfigured servers or services like we just talked about, the S3 buckets, and vulnerable internet-facing servers that don't have a compensating control in front of them, right? So really, when you get down to it, you really see that there's a huge opportunity space for us to either detect these attacks, fix these attacks, or even just to understand what the threat actors are going to hit next with a CTI program. So easy to do. All the tools are available online to test your own stuff. And then again, provider failure. One of the last things. Amazon has failed. OVH hosting had a giant fire. DNS, global DNS providers can get hit. So again, have a plan. What are we going to do if, the East Coast Amazon instance goes down? Are we able to move our data over to the West Coast? Can we migrate it? Do we have, standby infrastructure ready to go at some other data center, maybe with a different provider? These are the questions that you have to put to your organization, especially if they're transactional or if it's sensitive data that needs high availability. It has to be budgeted for. There are advantages to using the cloud. There's no question. One of the biggest advantages is DDoS mitigation. And both Azure and AWS have been doing a phenomenally good job of organizations in terms of preventing large-scale DDoS attacks on infrastructure. But keep this in mind, folks. If any part of your cloud is reliant on your on-premise infrastructure and the cyber criminals attack your on-premise infrastructure, it can knock out your cloud as well. And I see this quite a bit when you've got when you're reliant on your own DNS servers that are not hosted in the cloud, that are on-premise, and they are directing traffic into your cloud instance without a adequate infrastructure and backup infrastructure. You can find yourself in a really hard place. So what do I see the way out of all of this stuff? Well, it's really DevOps evolving into DevSecOps, being intelligence-led, okay? So again, what are my rules about this? If the application is poorly architected or is vulnerable, the platform on which it sits is irrelevant, right? So test all of this stuff. Make sure that you're following the secure coding. Get your team certified on the platforms they're using in DevOps, security, and architecture, right? Ensure the staging and perhaps dev environments are as close or scaled versions of prod. I tend to avoid pen testing prod environments. Encrypt the data at rest and in transit, and of course store the secrets and the signing keys for your organization safely with multi-factor authentication. And then when we see the evolving threat landscape, there are so many things that we can do to just make it a lot easier and a lot less stressful, right? Deploy content delivery networks and web application firewalls to mitigate a whole bunch of different layers of the attack surface, right? When you're talking about the threat models, have the conversations. Task your CTI program of giving you the worst case scenarios about what happens if these particular instances come under target. Again, can't stress multi-factor authentication is, the key to our problem. One of the stats that Microsoft loves to drop about MFA is that 99.5% of all of the compromised email accounts would have been mitigated with multi-factor authentication, right? Integrity monitoring and vulnerability scanning of the infrastructure, again, becomes critical. If you have a VPN endpoint that has local accounts that can be enumerated, those accounts are probably synced to the same password database as your other services that you have exposed on the internet. So again, be aware of your infrastructure coming under attack that may lead to a compromise of your production environment. Secure the development environment as you would the production storage of buckets and blobs, especially because we've seen what those actors can do by gaining access to a company and then potentially conducting the mother of all attacks, which is where you start distributing software that has malware built into it. Obfuscate that production data in the dev environment, and then, of course, DR and BCP testing for multi-region deployment and recovery. These are the critical areas to focus on to mitigate all of those bad actors that we just talked about that we're going to be faced with in 2022. And above everything else, stay in touch with us and join us for other webinars into 2022 where we talk about how all of this may change with a moment's notice. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to John Waters now for some Q&A.
Awesome, Ian. Thank you very much. Now we'll get to some questions for our attendees. Remember, folks, you can type your questions into the Q&A box at any time. We'll do our very best to get to all of them. So let's start with this question from, and I hope I'm pronouncing this properly, Asim. What are the best practices on storing secret keys?
So it's definitely in the repo and in basically protected with multi-factor authentication. These are sort of like the critical things, especially when it comes to signing software, because once that signature is used for malware, there's a hell of a big problem if you revoke that certificate, because then what can happen is you end up with a situation where you could potentially disable in production known good software because you've had to revoke that key. So it's a really ugly situation if your keys get compromised. The reason why I say in the repo is a good place to store them is the assumption that it's not a public repository. This happens quite frequently where a private key is put into a repository. Now, GitHub has made a lot of forward progress in detecting when that particular thing has happened, but there are bots just waiting for a public repo to expose a private key, and then all hilarity ensues.
Okay, looks like Asim has a follow-up that is similar to what David is asking. David asks, is there a best MFA solution? And Asim is asking, are there tools, any tools or good software solutions for multi-factor authentication? I guess they're looking for some recommendations here.
So a couple of ways to go about this is to think about, like, what do I need to protect? So if it's customers, the nice thing is at least on the Amazon platform and the Azure platform and the Google platform, the APIs for using authenticating devices, we can debate all night whether authentication apps or SMS 6 codes or 6-number codes, but that is way better than just relying on password hygiene alone. And so, in terms of actual solutions for management at scale, I mean, I know a lot of software development shops that are really like LastPass. But the point is think about what you're trying to protect. Like, is it your internal access or is it going to be external? And again, on the Microsoft side of the fence, it's Microsoft Identity Services, which is Microsoft Hello, which is baked into not only the OS now, but also in Azure. Again, it's all right there, ready to go. And Microsoft has its own authenticator as well that can generate codes to protect Active Directory and as well as Office 365 instances, including SharePoint. So all I'm saying is that, the enemy of good enough is perfect. Get one, implement it, use all of the public data. Don't try and roll your own, God forbid. And just, pick one and standardize it across your organization.
Awesome. Okay. Cedric asks, is IT security architect a recognized specialty?
It's funny because it kind of is and it kind of isn't. I broke down sort of the architecture roles into 3 different architectures. IT security architect is a bit dated because really what it is, it's a function that sits in between the infrastructure IT function and the business. And interesting enough, it's now being all called a BSIO role. So Business Security Information Officer. That is sort of the new title that I've seen bestowed on organizations. And it runs as an interface. So I would now start, like if I was in a career and I was an IT security architect and I called myself that for many years, I would start evolving into either a specialized cloud security engineer, a software architect, or an infrastructure architect to differentiate and to tell everyone out there what my specialty is. Now, it's assumed that, after 3 years of IT, you're probably not going to be bestowed the title of architect. Architects are usually people that have been in IT for a very long time and also have been in the business or have a keen understanding of the business or have similar experiences. Because the hardest thing on their job description is, first of all, getting an accurate understanding of the current state, and then an accurate understanding from the business on the proposed state, and then figuring out who to talk to get all of these different parts happening in sync. So it's very much a consultative role that is evolved into.
Fascinating. Okay, David wonders how comprehensive of a DR/BCP test is needed, and how often, I guess, does it need to be implemented?
So there's actually interesting, at least in the UK, there's some guidelines around this. So the FCA for Financial Control Authority requires proof of DR capability. ISO audits also, IT audit departments require that proof. And also, when I was working for a company that was a Lloyd's affiliate, they also asked for proof of DR. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you fail over a production system to a DR/BCP environment. What it can be is as simple as restoration of, your backup onto new media and a quick test to see if it can be accessed and if the data integrity is there, and some brief processing. It should be a project. It should have an official charter. It should have a budget. It should have IT resources and business resources to test the capability. And it can be as deep based on risk as you need it to be. So in our case, when you look at, a couple of days of potential downtime and what that impact would be to the organization, that was in a very much, an insurance policy generation capacity. Because obviously, if we're not generating insurance policies, we're not potentially making any money, right? But if you're in a transactional organization where literally your website is the thing that makes you money, man, you got to be on top of that, and you might want to run a complete failover every month or two, especially after a big software build has been deployed. You want to make sure that everyone is comfortable going through that exercise. So again, take a risk-driven approach, but make sure it's auditable and documented, and that you have those screenshots that show the application running in the DR/BCP, and that's your get-out-of-jail-free card for regulatory problems.
Okay, we've got time for one last quick question, and I want to ask it because I wonder this too. Janice asks, DevOps and DevSecOps, is it an evolution or a revolution?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. See, I think it's evolution because I really think that the job has become a bit overwhelming with the massive sort of cloud estates that businesses have evolved into. And I think the idea of taking more of an intelligence-led approach to it is a really powerful one, and adding that security component. But then also, the revolution is the fact that all of a sudden we're in a much more hostile place with our exposure to cloud and the massive adoption of cloud. So maybe we have to go through a revolutionary period and start putting security more as a priority, as some, organizations have, to their misfortune, found out. So yeah, I think it's a really great one, and it's the kind of thing that we should settle over drinks.
That's fascinating. Okay, thanks, Ian. That's all the questions we have time for. Many thanks to Ian Thornton-Trump for a great session, and to our sponsor, Rubrik, for making it possible. We're going to take a short break, but we'll be back shortly for our second session, Top 10 Cloud Infrastructure and Data Best Practices, led by Dave Kawula, Managing Principal Consultant at Tricon Elite Consulting, and John O'Neill Sr., Chief Technologist at AWS Solutions, and moderated by my colleague, David Rammel, who leads the editorial team at Virtualization and Cloud Review. Now would be a great time to check out those extra resources on your console provided by our sponsor. And remember, during today's second session, we'll be giving away an iPad Pro, which you must be present to win, so stay tuned. Bye for now.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you to our speakers, my fellow moderators, and of course, Rubrik for underwriting this summit and allowing us to bring you this great content. I'm David Rammel, editor of Virtualization and Cloud Review, here to moderate the second session of our summit called Top 10 Cloud Infrastructure and Data Best Practices. I'd like to introduce our two speakers for this session, Dave Kawula, Managing Principal Consultant at Tricon Elite Consulting, and John O'Neill Sr., Chief Technologist at AWS Solutions. Dave is a Microsoft MVP with over 20 years of experience in the IT industry. His background includes data communications networks within multi-server environments, and he has led architecture teams for virtualization, System Center, Exchange, Active Directory, and Internet gateways. John, with more than 20 years in IT, has worked as a consultant, architect, executive, speaker, and author. He's been involved in multinational networking, messaging, and communications projects. He has authored material for Thomson Reuters Aspitor books and exec blueprints and develops courseware for Pluralsight. Guys, it's great to have you here. Please take it away.
Well, thank you, David. It's our pleasure to be here, and this is a great event that we've got going on here. I just wanted to remind the audience that throughout the session there is a Q&A panel inside of there. So if you have any questions that you want John or myself to take live during the show, just go ahead and fire those away in the Q&A panel, and we'll do our very best to get to as many as we can. So with that, I think, John, let's get going with this. Got a lot of great content to cover here today. So when we look at the kind of top 10 practices for, cloud infrastructure, one of the big things for me, John, I know when I think about this is, cloud security comes top of mind, because you can't even go a single day anymore without having something in the news that a large organization has been breached, or there's been some type of a security incident, or, the organization down the street has just fallen victim to a threat actor and maybe some ransomware. And so when I think about, the best practices in chatting with customers and colleagues around the world, cloud security really comes top of mind for me. And, if you're going to take the first gold nugget out of this session, please don't be what John and I like to call a next finish cloud administrator. It seems that it's actually quite easy to set things up in the cloud because there's a lot of automation built in behind the scenes. But just remember, it's not always secured by default. So, John, what are your thoughts on, we've made this journey to the cloud now. We've got some tenants up there, maybe got some resources up there. Is it something that's just a set and forget? Or, what are some of the things we have to think about for hardening and locking these things down?
Well, thanks, Dave. I mean, how I feel on this, and the first thing that, I always talk about when I talk about cloud security is everyone needs to remember that not all cloud components are created equal. Just because you have components in the cloud doesn't mean they're being protected identically across them. One of the mistakes I see a lot of organizations make is they buy a package or contract with a vendor who says, "Oh, we're gonna do this function for you in the cloud," and nobody ever looks deeper. And then an event happens, right? And a compromise happens, and they find out that, oh, well, the back end of this really wasn't Azure or AWS or Google. It was a little tiny private cloud vendor who just didn't have the proper security controls in place or anything else. And guess what? It's too late then. So it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that when we connect anything to the cloud, we understand exactly how we're connecting it, what we're connecting it to, right? And all the potentials there. And just like you said, with our common term that you both you and I use all the time, the next finish, I like to think about it like I do at Tesla. And Tesla has autopilot and the full self-drive. Everybody's seen that in the news and everything else. But they're always telling you, well, you have to be ready to take control. Well, that's how it is in the cloud. You can't take somebody who doesn't have an understanding of how to drive a car and stick them in a Tesla and have that work out well. Eventually, there will be an accident. And the cloud's the same kind of way. If all you know how to do is click next, finish, and you don't understand what's happening in the background, that'll carry you for a while, but eventually you'll have a problem, and a little problem will potentially become a huge problem.
No, absolutely. And in regards to this one particularly, John, just some advice that I have for our attendees here today is when you're looking at your cloud tenant, I know that Microsoft has done a very good job for coming up with things like Azure Auto Manage, where it's all the intangible pieces that we might forget about for our infrastructure that's running up there. And so what we can do is we can define policies in there that state, oh, okay, well, we're going to add this piece of infrastructure. I'm going to add this IaaS virtual machine that's going to be running up in my tenant. How can I just make sure that when that slides in, it's protected by default? Okay, so that's number one. The second thing is that when you're looking for images that you're going to use for deploying your infrastructure up in the cloud, I don't know if everyone was aware of this or not, but the Center for Internet Security actually has their pre-hardened images available for you inside of the Azure Marketplace. And so the Center for Internet Security does a fantastic job creating security benchmarks and baselines for us. So now we don't have to be that next finish administrator. We can take a hardened security posture kind of out of the gate. And I think that maybe a lot of our attendees weren't even aware that that was even an option. So that's up there. There's hardened images that are available up there. We just need to know to look for them. All right. Okay, so the second thing, John, is, when we look at that infrastructure that's up in the cloud, one of the things that, you and I have been doing a lot with our talks around the world is talking a little bit about something called the cascade effect. And so this is another one of those little nuggets that you're going to take out of this presentation. You're going to go back to your team and say, I heard this new term called the cascade effect. And, John and Dave are introducing this thing, and we're trying our very best to have organizations understand this. And how I can explain the cascade effect, John, is very simply. It's, when you have on-prem infrastructure, somebody asks you for a request and they say, hey, listen, I would like to have 100 gigabytes added to this drive in this particular VM. And normally we think, oh, no problem, we'll add that. There's no big deal. But the cascade effect lives in behind there where, we've got backup infrastructure, we've got DR infrastructure, we've got storage that's going to be compounding that. And maybe we're taking copies of that data along the way to, protect it, following, data protection best practices with like 3-2-1 rules. Well, that just means that you have 3, 4, 5x copies of that data. So now when we take that 100 gig request, it could equate to actually 500 gigs in back-end storage for the way that we back it up and protect things. And this is even more problematic when it comes to cloud storage, because cloud storage moves into the infinite category for me, because we don't have the same restrictions that we would have for traditional on-prem infrastructure, where you can just kind of expand to your heart's content, and you're obviously going to get billed for that. But when we do that, there's big impact. So we have to really think about that cascade effect when we think about cloud-based storage, especially for our cloud infrastructure. Okay? Now, when we look at some of these pieces from a compliancy perspective and our cloud tenant, what are some of the things that our attendees should really think about from cloud storage from your perspective, John?
Well, Dave, there's a few points I want to make here about cloud storage. One of them I'll tie to my earlier statement about cloud providers are not created equal. So you need to understand what's the performance parameters and such behind the storage that you're using. Of course, if you're in one of the bigger providers, I'll use Microsoft, for instance. You have a big difference between the performance and therefore cost level between like blob storage and Azure NetApp file storage, right? And so you need to make sure that you're mapping the storage that you're consuming to the purpose it's being consumed for. If you have a live workload, obviously you want that to be pretty high performance and you're willing to pay a little bit more money for it. If you're, backing up multiple copies of your data or making a cold archive, then that can go in blob storage. Now, same thing, if you're using a smaller regional provider or something like that, you can ask them the question. What kind of storage are they using to provide this for you? Is it spinning disk storage? Is it NVMe? What are they doing on the back end to make sure that you have that performance? And this comes into play more than just with your daily live workloads. Dave, you and I have been involved in so many ransomware recoveries over the past, couple years that we've seen it time and time again, haven't we, where we go to do the restore and everybody thinks, okay, everything's great. We have this up in cloud storage or whatever, and the storage is slow, the pipe is slow or whatever, and you end up with, 80 to 100 hour transfer times just to get a workload restored. And during that time, everybody's down, everybody's, freaking out and everything else. So understanding that cloud storage performance is key. That also is, from a compliance standpoint, if your recovery point objective, your recovery time objective are defined and agreed to by the business and the organization and that kind of thing, you need to make sure that storage performance isn't going to be a bottleneck with there, because I can tell you that I spend a lot of time working in the C-suite and working with security insurance carriers and everything like that, just going in and going, oh, I didn't think about that, or I'm sorry, it didn't work out the way I expected. Yeah, that doesn't fly.
No, absolutely, John. And, the other couple points in here just around the performance of your cloud-based storage is they're not all created equal, right? Because you have different tiers of that storage. And so when you look at the pricing model, you say, oh, well, the cool storage is a much better deal. I'm just going to go for that for all my workloads. Well, it may not be applicable. You may need to go hot storage, or archive may be a good dumping ground for that data that's not used as often, but it takes time to rehydrate that, and there's a process that you need to learn. It's not the same as just being on-prem and double-clicking on a file and it's just there. There's different tiers where this is stored. The other big thing from a costing perspective, John. The other big thing from a costing perspective is understand where your storage accounts, like how they're going to replicate, because there's a difference between local replication, geo-replication, and zone replication, and there's pricing. You just add dollar signs to that as you go through, and you build that into your design. So anyways, John, you were saying?
Well, I was just going to throw out there that, remember, for us as IT pros, credibility is so valuable, right? Like it is for a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. And how many times, Dave, have you and I seen it where somebody, an IT pro, has sold the business on, hey, we're going to migrate this workload to the cloud and it's going to perform better, and our ERP application is going to run faster and smoother and everything else, and they pick that cheaper storage, and the company actually sees a downgrade in performance. Well, that's a huge credibility hit. And guess what? It doesn't go away when you just shift the tiers and everything. The next time you're trying to sell the business on a move to make, they remember those kind of missteps. So like you said, getting the right tier from the start is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, we actually have a really good question that was kind of relevant back to our first topic around, a little bit of cloud security. And this question comes in from Raymond, and he says, would you consider having a cloud-based routing appliance? And, the vendor of this doesn't really matter. Is it a necessary addition when you're making moves to the cloud for hybridization and moving traditional site-based WANs and things like that? And so I can take it first, and then you can maybe take the back half of it.
Perfect.
I think there's a lot of benefit in sticking with your existing, for example, firewall vendor that you have, because there's a big learning curve that goes into learning and understanding the platform that you're on. So you can actually swap out your routing components inside of your cloud tenant with your vendor of your choice, and then you can get that next-gen protection that you're looking for, because by default it's there to a certain extent, but it's not in its kind of like full guard capabilities. So there's ways to enhance that security posture. So John, any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, so I'm with you, Dave. I get asked this frequently, where people are like, oh, well, should we just go ahead and invest some dollars and replace this? And, in many cases, one of the things I see is it's not truly a cloud router, like, for instance, the Google Cloud Router product that's built into their cloud, or that kind of thing. It's just an appliance that has management capabilities, which are really no different than probably what you have now in capability. And I'm like you, Dave. I like having that perimeter that you can manage, because when an event happens and you have to make on-the-fly decisions and possibly throw some different connections in there and change some routes and that kind of thing, I like it to be in your control so that you can make those decisions and implement them faster than the attacker, faster than the need. Now, once you're connected up to your cloud, like I do this a lot in Azure, where you have connections between on-prem and Azure with site-to-site VPN and that kind of thing, you can implement cloud routing appliances or configurations up in there to create other connections and that sort of thing to enhance your configuration. But my opinion is definitely, you don't need to replace what you have to make progress with your hybrid infrastructure.
Awesome. Okay. So let's go. Next one here. Backups in the cloud. So everything's in the cloud now, John. It's automatically protected, right? Like there's automatic protection that's inside of there for you. That's all true, right? Like you move it up to the cloud, you're pretty safe. Like, or do you have to flip some switches to go through your configuration? I'm thinking, forward vision here. We're moving into 2022. And so now we're going to be having more and more workloads for our infrastructure, for our organizations up in the cloud. Is this something we still have to be concerned about after we move? Because, we've probably got pretty good backup schemes, on-prem, but what about in the cloud? Like, is this something we have to worry about?
I wish it was something we didn't have to worry about. And like most things, the marketing material will tell us, oh, cloud backup solves all these problems for you. Well, it does solve some challenges, but it adds others. Like anything, it requires a lot of care and feeding and understanding. You can't be next finish on these guys, because it will look good while you're doing it, but then when, the event happens and you've got a disaster and you've got to depend on it, now little variations expose themselves, little cracks, and, the world kind of comes apart on you. So with cloud backup, there's a few things I throw out to everyone. First off, and this isn't directly backup related, but obviously backups tie to ransomware and malware. A lot of people think because they put their backups in the cloud, they're automatically ransomware proof or ransomware protected. And that's not exactly true. Depending on how you set that up and how you back them up, those backups aren't necessarily immutable. If you do set them up properly so they're immutable, then that's great, and that provides you some protection. But you need to take that step actively. And another one that I'm going to talk about, and then I'm going to throw it back to you, Dave, is really that RTO, that recovery time objective. I've seen this so many times where people back up to the cloud and they don't do restore tests, fire drills, so they have no true understanding of how long it will take them to do a restore from that cloud repository back to their on-prem environment. And again, when you have an outage and you have, anywhere from a few to a few thousand people that are standing around waiting for you and IT to complete your restore work, that time matters. Every minute matters. I'm sure everybody listening to our session today has been in that state where they're trying to get work and they have users coming in and asking them every 60 seconds, is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? Like that nightmare vacation trip from my youth in the station wagon.
I don't think that was your vacation. I think that came from a movie, John.
Yeah, well.
All right, we have a great question that came in from Marcin here, and this was in regards to just along the same lines of storage and things like that. So his question was, I thought that you could change your storage tier based on availability. For example, things that are accessed infrequently move out to the tiered storage, the slower storage. Are those good solutions in your opinion? And I can take this one if that's okay, John. So Martin, yeah, absolutely, but you have to make sure that you actually configure that depending on what your application is looking for. So in the example of Azure Files, for that example, we have our hot tier that is cached locally for the frequently accessed files, and then we can tier up to the cloud kind of based on policy and things like that. And then depending on how your application is going to work, you can move things around as well for apps between those storage tiers as well. The only one that's a little tricky with that is like the archive tier, because there's a hydration period that happens inside of there because it's kind of moved off to a little bit more dormant storage. So you don't want anything that's going to be really frequently accessed off in that archive tier. That's just more of your dark, cold storage that you have. But fantastic question. And once again, reminder, if you have questions, fire away. John and I are here, and so we'll get to as many as we absolutely can. All right, so then the next one here is that, you're 100% in the cloud now, right? It's 2022. You modernized everything, right, John? Like you're finished your cloud migration project. You don't have any more on-prem components. And is that really a true statement? I'm not sure. Do you use Office 365 or using Azure AD? Like what components makes this hybrid, and where are we seeing this going kind of for trends and what we would recommend for individuals and organizations? And for myself, I see hybrid being there for a long time, right? Because there's just certain on-prem apps that we have in large organizations that are really not well suited for the clouds. And I just think I always go back to kind of that manufacturing sector where we need plants to run independently and kind of siloed off kind of example, John. And there's always hybrid identity component portions. And maybe the utopia 5 years down the road sees no more on-prem infrastructure. I don't really see that happening myself. I think that just hybrid is something that's here and going to be here for a long time yet for a lot of organizations. So, what are some of your thoughts on the hybrid management piece here, John?
Well, I'm totally in agreement with you, Dave. And, one of the things I hear often from organizational leadership teams is we're in the cloud. And in their minds, that means that all of their IT runs in the cloud, even though they don't even know really what the cloud means or anything else. And that isn't the case. And actually, if you sit down with them and you explain what the risk would be to the organization if they were 100% in the cloud, I don't know too many organizations that would accept that risk. Because again, any organization that delivers a product or service is dependent upon the delivery of that product or service. So if they lost connectivity to the cloud and, like you said, in a manufacturing environment, their machinery couldn't run. If you're in a distribution environment, you couldn't properly load your trucks or unload your trucks, right, or move things around a warehouse. All those things cost not only a whole lot of money in a very short period of time, but they cost reputation. They can damage your relationship with customers or vendors or that kind of thing. So I really don't think that most organizations would choose to be 100% in the cloud, even if that was a reasonable thing. And I don't think it is a reasonable thing, because the amount of work it would take to unwind current identity management systems, DR systems, and then just daily production systems like ERP and MRP and those kind of things, yeah, that just makes it unreasonable. So in my mind, for the foreseeable future, as far out as I can see, the majority of organizations, except for the smallest kind of greenfield players, are going to be hybrid. And so that just means that they should really be looking at things like a zero trust model, because now with a hybrid connection, the cloud is just part of your organization. You have to protect your assets where they exist, not where you think they exist.
Yeah, and with Microsoft's new solutions out there as well, like moving to and from the cloud just becomes so much easier with, Azure Migrate platforms, Azure Arc for hybrid management, extending Defender for cloud and protecting those resources becomes so much easier. And we have a really, really good question that just came in here, John. And this one just came in from Arthur. And Arthur, I really have to thank you for this question, and I really wish that more people would ask this one. So simple question, but so relevant in today's world. What are the hidden costs of the cloud? And this is your gold nugget for everyone. And, I might have some cloud service providers that are out there that, resell these services that might get mad at me. But you know what, John? That's okay, because we struggle with this with many of the organizations that I know that we talk with. And, getting an accurate invoice and billing model back from them so that you can articulate what exactly you're spending can be very challenging. And something that many organizations may not know is that, for example, Microsoft's actually gone back into a direct billing sub now, where you can now natively see those invoices directly back in your portal again. Whereas if you're with the cloud service provider model, what will end up happening is that your invoices are kind of shielded from you as the consumer, and you have to wait for your cloud service provider to, take that information and, give it to you in some type of a form of an invoice. And one of the things that I know, John, you and I have found issues with is trying to figure out where the spend is and, what we're spending money on what. And when we moved over to that direct bill sub and seeing the actual invoices coming through, that was a lot easier to get to that point that Arthur was getting at, because, we spun up the cloud. Where are we spending money? Where are those hidden costs? That will get you to the nickel, all of your hidden costs if you do something like that. So,
and Dave, I'd love to throw in a couple here, because this is perfect. The hidden costs are many. They are legion. And like you said, we've seen some improvements, for instance, with Microsoft, where, you can do direct bill, and all of a sudden you start seeing details and you realize not just the markup that the CSP is putting in, because we all understand that every time you add a hand in the pot, you're going to add to the cost, but the very fact that you're able to identify that things are using the wrong type of, for instance, VM level, or the wrong tier of storage, or that kind of thing. But it's not all perfect. For instance, there are some things that Microsoft still won't allow you to put under your direct bill subscription, and they push back. So if you have an EA with an outside vendor and you want to get a subscription to the on-demand threat experts, they will make you go to wherever your EA is. They won't put it under your direct bill subscription, so it can end up kind of hidden it. And you've got to manage all these things, and you've got to manage them in real time, because they change the rules on you all it seems like every day. And another thing I want to mention to everybody, because I think everybody will kind of get this, is that when you take kind of a bulk package, so your combo meal that's at one cost, and you break it up into an a la carte menu, we like that because it often allows us to choose more of what we want and less products and save money. But at the end of the day, when it comes to cloud, what I see a lot is there are so many options that people pick things, they forget they pick them, and they continue to get billed for them even after they're done using them, right? And they just can't keep track of all the different compute costs and storage costs and everything else. So a huge hidden cost of cloud, if you want to kind of wrap it up in a general statement, is simply what you will need to do to manage the costs of cloud.
So what you're really saying is don't be a cloud hoarder. That's what you're really saying. Don't be scared to go through and clean up the things that are in there, for sure. One more piece to that, Arthur, a big way that you can save costs inside of your cloud. Look up reserved instances as well, because you can pre-buy services, moving you from an OpEx to a CapEx model, where you can pre-buy instances for 1, 2, 3 years, and you can see pretty massive savings inside of there as well. So reserved instance is something else I would recommend. Okay, security and compliance in the cloud. This is huge because, John, you made a statement earlier in our session here that, cyber insurance and things like that are now demanding that, we've got a much better security posture. We can't just go bury our heads in the sand and say, listen, we think we're okay. We might be okay. And from my perspective, this is one of those areas that cloud really helps us from an IT perspective, John, because there are so many moving parts that we have to look at for, the evolution of us accessing some type of application. We've got some type of identity or credentials that we're using. We are placing that infrastructure somewhere, be it on-prem or be it in the cloud. Maybe we've got single sign-on components allowing, vendors or third parties coming into that application. Maybe there's other hooks off to other portions of different cloud apps that are out there. We need to make sure that we're not only looking at that flow, but we're also protecting it end to end and also making sure that we comply with all of the security and governance standards that come with that. Because depending on what type of organization you're in, you could be having to follow very strict regulations in order to take and make sure that infrastructure is safe and secure and compliant. So, from the cloud, this is one of my favorite areas, John, because there's so much that we can do that just wasn't previously available. And my one piece of advice under cloud security and compliance, you need to make sure that you're still upgrading your core OS of your application servers. If you think that you're going to be able to protect something that's running on server 2003 and you're thinking to yourself, wow, really? Yeah, that stuff's still out there. 2008, even more. 2012, yes, it's probably in everybody's infrastructure. Got to keep working on those plans to get that old stuff out of there because that old stuff that's in there, you're not going to be able to leverage all the advanced security components that are available for you. So you've got to continue that journey of modernizing your infrastructure, cloud or on-prem.
Well, Dave, I'm gonna jump in here and throw a couple of things. And you know me, I usually start out talking about identity management and that, but I know we have a slide where we're going to dive deep into Azure AD and some of that. So I'm going to move kind of beyond that and really dovetail onto what you were saying and remind everyone that I just want to tell you, I spend a lot of time in the cybersecurity insurance arena and understanding that. And things aren't like they were even 10 years ago. We could go beyond that, but even 10 years ago. Whereas if you made a mistake in IT, if you let an unsupported operating system on and you happen to get a virus and there was some downtime, you got a slap on the wrist. Everything I'm seeing is when organizations are hit, when they lose massive amounts of money, when they end up in the news, whether it be local, regional, or national, the individual that was responsible for preventing that area of the IT infrastructure is held accountable. They are held accountable, and that will follow you. And a big reason for that accountability is because the cybersecurity insurance carriers are really tightening the screws and getting much more particular about what they're going to make you prove before they pay out on a policy claim. Okay, and if they, like you said, if they can come in and they see, hey, you have Windows XP still running on your network, well, guess what? If you read into their, fine print, they're probably going to have in there that you cannot run any operating system that is no longer currently supported by its primary vendor, because some of them are adding that in. And it doesn't matter whether you go, well, we had this legacy app, or we had this, or we had that. Understand, this isn't a debate or a compromise discussion. This is them trying to find a reason to not pay your claim. And as soon as they do, it's done. And then your organization is holding you accountable. So take it serious. I'm not trying to be scary or doom and gloom. I'm just trying to put that message out there that we as IT pros, have to step up and understand that, if we miss something, it's going to hang on our backs.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, very well put, John. All right, the Azure AD slide. There it is. It's almost like you knew that one was coming for us. So Azure Active Directory is a big portion of almost every organization that we come across. And there's just a couple points here for your cloud infrastructure, because we have to remember that us as, IT pros, infrastructure analysts, engineers, we serve one very simple purpose to the organization. We help the organization gain access to the core and critical applications that they're using on a daily basis, and we're there to, help to make sure that they're successful. And so a couple pieces in here is that the Federation Services, ADFS, is kind of a dirty word at Microsoft now. It's one of those ones that thou shalt not mention. So, if you are still running ADFS out there today, you want to be looking at some migrations and bringing and modernizing that up to Azure Active Directory. There's so much more protection that you're going to be able to get by, cloud enabling those single sign-on components. It's one of the areas that, in my opinion, Azure AD really shines, and you're going to be able to do a lot cooler things and better things with your organization. And a couple other pieces inside of here with Azure AD. This is not something that you just configure. It's kind of part of your tenant by default. You don't really have to do a lot other than just activating your domains that you want to use inside of there. Getting AD Connect up there so that you can sync your hybrid identities from your on-prem Active Directory. But please just understand that there's post-configuration steps that are required in there. And those post-configuration steps come in the form of things like conditional access and multi-factor authentication. And specifically around conditional access, I really need you to look at those conditional access rules that you're running in your organization. For example, if you're a North American organization and there's absolutely no reason for login attempts to be coming from, other areas of the world, consider country blocks in there. I know they're not perfect, but they're going to help. You also want to make sure that your global admin accounts that you're using are not your daily driver accounts. So many times we see this, John, where the global administrator for your cloud tenant is a daily driver on somebody's workstation. Please don't do that, because if that workstation gets compromised, you just handed the skeleton key of everything cloud to the threat actor. That's what they want. So what you have to do is you have to have separate accounts that are inside of there that lock that down. And then as you lock that down, you want to make sure that you don't lock yourself out. So in comes the concept of, a break glass account, only use this if. And so conditional access policies actually require you to have break glass accounts. But, if you're not very familiar with Azure AD today, and this is, a different department or something like that, I highly encourage you to spend some time learning more about it, because this is a big part of your cloud-based infrastructure and will be for, the foreseeable future forever. So, John.
Well, just a few thoughts to throw here. First thing that I tell everyone is identity management is a foundational premise of your total cybersecurity. So get a handle on it. Care and feeding is critical. And one of the best pieces of advice I can give you is get to as close to a single source of identity management as you can, and make that single source a product or technology that is dedicated to identity management, such as Active Directory or Azure Active Directory. So many times I see organizations using the built-in password databases of, the custom quality application they have, or their ERP or whatever. Even SQL, the local authentication built into SQL has nowhere near the level of technological security behind it that Active Directory does. So when you shift your SQL servers from using local auth, the SA password, for those of you that know it, to using integrated auth, you increase your security stance exponentially. So get to that single source as much as you can, and then use things like SSO, single sign-on, to extend that single source to other cloud products or other products so that they're all coming back to it. The next is, like you said, Dave, Microsoft is so begrudgingly supporting ADFS these days, regardless of what they say otherwise. You and I operate a lot in that space, and we can see it. And the reason is because back when they started all this, even just a few years ago, okay, ADFS is how we're going to do it. And then they came out with the original DirSync product that later became AD Connect, and ADFS was still a key part. They really don't want you to do that anymore, and so it behooves you to start your move away from it if you can, and get to where you're really just at AD Connect. And here's a pro tip for everyone. AD Connect in a default configuration automatically upgrades minor versions. It does not automatically upgrade major versions. So everybody gets confused and they think, oh, I had to install AD Connect, I got it up and running, but it's just going to keep itself upgrading. That is not true. If you're going from one major version to another, you, as of now, have to manually update that product. And the easiest way to find out what version of AD Connect you're running is just go to your apps and features, or programs and features in your control panel or your settings, and look at the version. It'll be listed there, and you can compare it to the official documentation to see where you're at.
Awesome. Good stuff, John. Good stuff. Now, one of the questions that often comes up is that, like, are cloud configurations for our infrastructure more reliable than, what we've traditionally built over the last 20 years on-prem? And I think for me, the answer is, it depends, because when you by default, spin up resources that you've got and the type of availability that you've got, typically you've got what we would call like single data center failover capabilities, right? So you've got like local failover capabilities. And if your organization is one that, is highly available everything, you got to have highly available SQL services. You've got to have highly available web services. Maybe you're going to Kubernetes clusters for, your front-end application tier that you're running. And so one of the things that you really have to think about with your cloud infrastructure is going multi-region, if not potentially multi-cloud for some of that, to spread out your risk and to spread out some of your load. One of the issues that I have in going like multi-cloud with my solutions is now I've got two things that I need to operationalize my team on. And with the pace of cloud, it's hard enough for us to operationalize on one cloud. So I've seen organizations really struggle with that, where they try to, have a multi-cloud. Single cloud multi-region, though, makes a lot of sense, where, you've got regions in, for example, the U.S., East U.S. and West U.S., and then they've got multiple data centers even in there. I'm from Canada, so we've got Canada Central and Canada East, which they're kind of weird ones, right? Because there are technically both in Eastern Canada. We don't have an Azure data center in the West. So you have to really watch where these things are from a geographical placement. Yes, it can cost a little bit more money to go multi-region, but the cloud providers are giving us, really good options for even load balancing, throwing our front-end load balancing that we would typically have, like large appliances that would be running this, up cloud side, so that, we can now diversely go wherever we want. We can go hybrid on-prem, we can go some resources in the cloud, we can go some resources other cloud, and we can have like cloud-based load balancing solutions out there, like Azure Traffic Manager. And I've seen organizations be quite successful with that right now. And so, John, what's your thoughts on some regional protection for organizations out there?
Well, Dave, what I encourage people to do is kind of think about it, and let's back up. Let's go 50,000 feet in the air and look over time. Organizations used to operate and exist in kind of a very small area, a local town, maybe into a region, and then it expands nationally. And we all know that now we exist in a global economy, economic transactions, product transactions. It doesn't really matter where they're built. They're shared and marketed and transacted around the world. So look at where you're interacting and where you're operating, and make sure that the cloud solutions and configurations that you're choosing and you're applying match with that interaction level, right? And it's kind of like you said, if you look at your interactions and you have high levels of requirements for availability across country barriers even, but yet you have everything that's configured in your cloud local to the region where your headquarters is, that's probably not a very resilient choice. So you need to manage that. And so I encourage everybody to do that. But I know we got a lot of great content, so I don't want to take too much time. So I'll pass it over to you and we can move forward.
Perfect. And I just have a question that came in from David here. It's a great question. Is there a recommended version of AD Connect? So this kind of goes back to our last slide there. And for me, it's, you want to be on the latest one that's out there, but 2.0 is kind of the new standard as far as I know. Anything else to add on that one, John?
Well, absolutely. And what I'm doing right now is I'm actually pulling up the Microsoft official page. If you're using Windows Server 2016 or newer, then 2.0 is what you should be using. And 2.0.28 looks like the current version for that. If you're using pre-Windows Server 2016, which then my recommendation is get those servers upgraded, at least your domain controller, your AD servers. Well, if you're using pre, then the last version or the current version of the 1.6, I believe, is going to be like 1.6.4 in that area. But if you look it up, there is a docs.microsoft.com article. It's called Azure AD Connect version release history. It's frequently updated by the product team, and that's where you'll find your recommended current version.
Awesome. All right, John, we got 3 more to cover here, and then we'll be done for the day. Multi-cloud protection. So, I consider multi-cloud to being like a hybrid, cross-cloud, single cloud, multi-region. And so I find that there's just certain questions that you have to ask when you're looking at multi-cloud protection. And it's number one is, does your application even have the capability to fail over cross-cloud? Because your application has to be written in such a way that it can actually handle that. You've got to dig into the obstacles that you'll face going through that as part of your project, right? Because if your application is not designed to fail over cross-cloud, you're potentially looking at a rewrite scenario for those applications and workflows and processes that are involved. The big question is this even a viable scenario? Like, is this something that we even need to do, or is this just like utopia that we're looking for? And the last one is can you protect your workloads going across those clouds? And I think the easiest one to answer here is protecting the workloads from a security and a high availability and a DR perspective. Absolutely. That is a no-brainer. Failing over between your clouds, that's where you actually have to take and spend a little bit more time digging in to see what your applications will even support, because it's not something you can just press a magic button and say, yeah, everything's protected. I can just press the button and fail over. There's a lot of variables that go into, how that application runs. And so that's a bigger question, I find. All right. So this one here is really up your alley, John. Growing too fast. Organizations just keep getting pushed from an IT perspective that, we need to keep, ingesting so many new technologies. And, what can organizations do to kind of deal with this particular situation? Because I'm finding it's not even that we're growing too fast. I'm finding that we're getting to a point right now where we're asking existing IT teams to do more. And what are some of your thoughts on, individuals to help them through that challenge?
Just a few things real quick, Dave. Like you said, it's a lot of it is based upon existing teams being tasked with more, which was, normal during the economic downturn and that kind of thing. But, a lot of companies are doing very well right now, and they're like, well, if we could ask our IT teams to do it before, we can just do it again and throw more on their plate. IT needs to do a better job of going back to the business and telling them the truth of the matter, which is, hey, if we keep doing this, what's going to happen is we're going to sacrifice quality. And so the analogy I use is there's been a lot of news about RVs, campers. They're selling at record numbers and manufacturers can't keep up. But those that are buying campers are finding all sorts of quality problems, even in the highest end units that just didn't exist a few years ago. Why is that? Because they're trying to produce the numbers without paying attention to quality, and something has to give. The same will happen in IT. So you have to have this dialogue with the business where you're really explaining what the risks are to quality and the product that you'll deliver if that continues to happen. And then you work with them to prioritize, because you can prioritize the projects you are being assigned with them for business alignment. And then you can also go back to them and you can ask for additional resources, whether it be internal hires or external consultants or that kind of thing. And then the final one I'm going to mention is take advantage of the opportunity to learn about things like Azure Auto Manage and other technologies that will help you automate care and feeding activities. Because if you can automate, the day-to-day care and feeding activities safely, then you can focus on delivering the more, rapid-fire business-aligned demands.
For sure, and this whole conversation of not just growing too fast, it's the emergency requests that came through that were based on the global pandemic that we're still facing here. I need everyone to work from home tomorrow. Set up the VPN right now. But what about security? Don't care. Set it up. Now what do we have? We have a raft of ransomware attacks, lots of low-hanging fruit out there for the bad guys, and years of cleanup that are caused behind that. So, John, to your point, don't be scared to push back. If something's not right or is not going to work, push back a little bit and say, hey, listen, we maybe need to reapproach this a little, have a different approach to this.
Yeah, because Dave, how many times have you and I seen where those same people that were the heroes because, they were IT and they stepped up and they got everybody working remotely and online, when the ransomware events hit that you and I have gone into, the business leaders that put all that pressure on those IT folks forget that they ever brought that pressure to bear.
Yeah, absolutely. And got a couple minutes left here, John, and then we'll hand it back over to David here. Real-time protection. Oh, my goodness. This couldn't be more important for going throughout your cloud tenants as well as your on-prem infrastructure. And I think you have to ask yourself a series of questions. Like, for example, we had an alert that came through that we dealt with earlier this week, or was it last week? Everything's kind of a blur now. And it's basically intrusion attempts coming from the following IP address. And I now need to instantly know everywhere that external IP address that was hitting me has touched in the organization. I don't want to just get firewall logs. I want to see if this thing has actually gotten to any of my workstations and is trying to do, malicious things. And so threat hunting is a huge portion of this. It is available for you as part of your Azure tenant. It's now been rebranded and it's recalled Azure Defender for Cloud in your cloud tenant. And there's cloud app security and so many of these other components. You need to look at these. Threat hunting is a big portion of that. And the other thing is that the more data that you can feed into the system through SIEM-based integration and log analytics, the more you're going to get the complete picture of what's going on. So, Azure Sentinel is a really big plus here. So, John, I'll give you the last thoughts on this here for 30 seconds, and we'll hand it back over to Mr. Ramo.
Well, the only thing I'm going to mention on this one is just to really dovetail SIEM, that security incident event management, that is becoming another highly looked at, highly expected area when it comes to compliance and cybersecurity insurance and that kind of thing, those reviews. So make sure that you have a good solution. Get it integrated with products like Azure Sentinel so that you have, the ability to answer questions rapidly without causing yourself a whole lot of extra work or grief when it comes down to it.
Awesome. And with that, we will hand it back over to David and the crew. And there you go.
Okay, thanks, guys. You guys were actually so good and so comprehensive, you answered all of the audience questions. But there is a statement from Raymond, who had a question earlier, if you guys want to discuss that. He's talking about the different types of storage. And he says, cloud-based backup storage follow-up. It's a follow-up to his cloud-based storage question. Hot storage is expensive. Cold storage and the discussed types have a multitude of drawbacks. Something we have kicked around is setting up an off-site small data center where backups are transferred from on-site backup repositories to the data center with a site-to-site VPN with a bulk amount of storage, and then cloud backups are pushed to cold storage on a scheduled cycle. What do you guys have to say about that?
Oh, I think that, Raymond, that's a fantastic idea, because you're going to have access to that local source of kind of your second copy of the data. In the world of backup and disaster recovery, we follow what's called a 3-2-1 rule. So 3 copies of your data in 2 different locations and 1 of them off-site. So what it sounds like to me is you're kind of following that to an absolute T. They do add a couple extra tiers in there now that you try to have 1 of those copies as some type of immutable storage as well, but you're very close, and that's a very standard design. So you're definitely heading down the right path.
Okay, and with that, we are out of time, and I will now thank you guys for a great presentation and answering those questions.
Awesome. Thank you, David.
Okay, now I'm going to pass it over to Victoria for some closing announcements and the giveaway of our iPad Pro. Victoria?
Hi, everyone. My name is Victoria Waba, and I would like to thank all of you for joining us today. A few closing announcements before we depart today. As you leave, you'll be asked to take a short survey with your opinions of this event. Please share those honest opinions. Our editors read every comment, and they really help to shape our future events. And speaking of future events, we really want to thank Rubrik. They're sponsoring this event because they believe in this community and want to support events like these. So please show your support and appreciation by downloading their resources and visiting their site and contacting them for a demo. It's through their underwriting of these events that we can bring more summits in the future. They have provided a link to a demo to the right of your audience console, so please take a moment to check that out. So a big thank you to Rubrik, thank you to our speakers, thank you to our fellow moderators, and now let's draw the winner of our random prize drawing. Congratulations, Rodney Patterson from Bayview Asset Management. You have won the iPad Pro. Our team will be in touch with you on how to claim your prize. That's it for the summit today. Thank you all so much. You will get your replay email in the next few days. We hope you enjoyed this event, and please do take the survey that pops up when you exit. Thank you, and thanks again to Rubrik. Have a wonderful rest of your day.